out, I really only started seeing the contours of the book in 2020, and I think the pandemic really shaped it. I was watching some documentaries on Audre Lorde, and then this whole, I would say, affective episode with this loving and leaving across the periphery. I published that in a paper for the journal On Culture. It started to take shape. I did come to Gießen, although I actually lived in Offenbach, which is a very specific migrant community. Over 60% of Offenbach residents are of migrant background. So I think also Offenbach equipped me with a particular kind of affective attunement to be able to finish this book and to kind of give it a specific stamp. But it started as a project. I wanted to work on a project. I drafted a project called To Occupy or Leave, dealing with unfrozen conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina through social protests and economic migration. So I basically wanted to see, it caught me and I applied for it in 2018. This was around the time when I just come to Germany from Bosnia, and this was a very pregnant time in terms of the Justice for David movement, Justice for Jena. Of course, it was preceded. These movements were not without their histories. There have been many movements, and I can see in the audience some of the actual participants of different social protests in Bosnia from 2013 onwards. So that was around the time when I saw people occupying the streets. And also you mentioned my activist work in BASOK, Banja Luka Social Center. I think it was very crucial for me as an academic to grow, through my friends, colleagues, comrades, my dear people who I all thanked in the book, without whom this book would have been impossible, from whom I learned and I continue to learn. And then I also was witnessing, and I joined this movement of people. Now the story goes, I was laughing the other day, how it's been termed the Great Replacement. And I've heard that, which is a very right-wing, I would say, almost racist way of saying things, that the Great Replacement is happening in the Balkans, that Balkan people from the Balkans are leaving en masse. And have been leaving post 2015 to occupy positions of pflegers or care workers, Baustelle workers, construction workers, waiters, cleaning, Reinigung, as they would say in Germany. So this was a very politically contested time that I think also provided a certain optics for me. And it was also the time, not that time particularly, I would say 2015, when my country, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the Western Balkans became part of the Balkan route. So from afar, and I've never really, this is also, there's been a lot of controversy around it, how to approach the issues of, the migrants coming from the Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Asia, most notably Afghanistan and Pakistan, South and Central Asia, to be more precise, and how to deal with all of that mess. And the only way for me to deal with it was through this sort of affective attunement, through I would say adopting a feminist optic, left politics, very strong left commitment, whatever that may mean for some people. To kind of think through the migrant solidarity. And there's been recently, I mean, I'm sure we can discuss that in the Q&A, this question of, should we demigrantize the migrant and migrantize the citizen? There's been a lot of ideological debate on, whether we should say people on the move or migrants, and some journal articles are being cooked up as we speak. And all these insights, all these problems, issues, these neuralgic spots, they call for a great deal of contextualization. And even though I may have been imprecise, I needed to get this book out of my system, because to me, it wasn't just a book. It really meant, for me, it was a way of healing. I don't know how successful, because I also around that time contracted an autoimmune disease, which also sharpened my vision, and which is something that I think happens in this cruel place called the academia, of which we, like Laurent Berlant, we are like cruel optimists that academia will heal us, and it won't, because ultimately it's problematic. It's very, it's also producing very many peripheral selves. Just like in my book. So to kind of sketch this context, where do we go from pain? I often ask myself this question, because pain has been a common denominator for many of those things. It wasn't about feeling good. It was about actually feeling bad. And like, you know, as Beckett would say, fail better. So, you know, this whole act of failing for me was also a way to kind of realize that, you know, these boundaries, inequalities, racial valorizations, wounds, like Ansel Dua talks about when she talks about a colonial wound, was something that has shaped not just me, but many of my country fellow scholars, but that also opened up through this wound an ability for us coming from the peripheries. And of course, these peripheries are not by any means similar. I am much more privileged that many of my counterparts who are now on the Balkan route, who are now in Lipa and you know, in temporary reception centers. But I think that we should from here open up a place of polemic, of dialogue, of discussion, because we are the only people that we have. So without further ado, I'd like to say a little bit how I structured, how this book came to be structured. Okay, so aside from the introduction chapter, there are three what I call theoretical chapters, where I talk about periphery from the world systems theory, dependency theory, and then I talk about the kind of the nodes between post-coloniality, decoloniality, and socialism. And I'll explain what I mean by these major terms, because I think that's good for the discussion. And then as an ardent, trained linguist and critical discourse analyst, I needed I just somehow realized that discourse was not enough. And I'm really glad that you mentioned Johannes Angemüller and this post-disciplinary studies in discourse series, because I think this book is a perfect match for such a series, because it escapes discourse. So, you know, as someone who's researched discourse for 15 years, published many papers in discourse studies and critical discourse analysis, I think this effective turn via what Susanne Leto, a German philosopher, calls critical materialism, which she sees as a bridge between historical and new materialism. And of course, I delineate what I take from new material. I'm not completely new materialist in this sense. What that has meant for me, and how this departure from linguistics, from discourse analysis into the realm of more of a like Deleuze-Guattarian conceptual terrain of plateaus, assemblages, territorializations, what that has meant for me as a researcher, only to embark on the three more empirical chapters in which I also eclectically combined different methodologies, from critical autoethnography to in-depth interviews. And I always like questioned my own commitment and my own, like I was always, I mean, I'm not an anthropologist, but I'm very driven to anthropological texts. I'm not a historian, I'm also very driven to historical texts. And what can I, as a primarily cultural studies scholar, had to say about what is going on in my country. So I started with this body, mobilizable post-socialist body politic. I start with the Banja Luka Social Center, which was pivotal for me and for the whole community in Banja Luka, because it provided a defactified space, a space where we could talk and do things and collaborate with people from Sarajevo, from the plenums, from Dita, from Gračanica, with women of Kruščica, with some of the most, how would I say, energetic and powerful groups, especially groups of women, and what that kind of feminist sensibility equipped me with, because without them, I wouldn't be who I am today. And I can see some of the former blaspheme guests, dear friends who are here with us tonight. Only to move on to the Justice for David and why it was an extraordinary social movement for me, and why it and how in many ways overlapped with my penultimate chapter on migrating laboring bodies. And how these two were connected, because at the time when I started writing the book, David's father was in Banja Luka, Davor, and then he escaped. Then he sought asylum in Austria. He stayed there for almost 3 years. He was denied asylum. His mother, David's mother, came as a socioeconomic migrant to Wiener Neustadt, where she still lives, and where David's remains were transferred in 2019. So in many ways, I would say that Austrian and German context played a role. And these are very different contexts, although the language is similar. And we always stumble upon the issue of the German language and how these new geographies also played a role. And then, of course, to be able to meet some of my friends in Offenbach, which again, living there provided me with a specific kind of consciousness. My friend, dear friend, whose name is actually cited, she agreed to have her name presented in the book. My friend Danijela, I don't know if she's with us tonight. I can't really see. Maybe she is. Who really, as a person, provided me with an understanding of what it means to be a child of Yugoslav immigrants from the first wave, then to have come to Germany on her own as a second wave migrant fleeing the war in Bosnia, and then to end up working in this institute that was in charge for Anerkennung of the diplomas of many of the people coming in this third wave. So she, in a way, as a person, as a friend, I was really, really lucky in writing this book to have come across the people that I did, and sort of in the Derridian politics of friendship, to have made these people my friends. And in this way, by this unflinching commitment on both sides to somehow address, if not completely avoid, the issue of ethics. Because I think the issue of ethics, reflexivity, and positionality is key when somebody who hasn't been trained in anthropological methodology, but like, again, with this strong political commitment, which I think, it's never fixed, of course, we should always strive to better ourselves in the sense, but for me, it was this kind of left commitment was unflinching. It was really my guide in trying to to be on the right side, or to kind of see the painstaking issues that were happening in Bosnia. So in the final chapter, although I haven't, and I really think that it's problematic for me in the future, I don't think that I really ever, of course I do, but like, I don't want to study. There's this trend of Western researchers to come to Bosnia and kind of exploit. Many of my friends have been writing papers, and they were literally said, you're not supposed to write the theory, you just provide the data. So it's also the question of this inequality and peripherality in terms of who gets to write what. The issue of exploitation is always there. So if I wanted to go to the camps in Bosnia, I think it would be, if I could help to talk to the locals, maybe local police even, but by no means would I ever, I see that as a problem now. I spoke about the so-called Menasea migrants, who are, of course, very different people, but they are not tourists, so we have to understand that these people come from specific genealogies of war and violence, much like the Bosnians in the 90s. So to me, this is like a big, it's hard. So I try in kind of Trinity Minhas way to speak not of, but to speak nearby. So I don't want to compare the migrant figures. I don't want to equalize them. I don't want to do any of that stuff, but to kind of still be able to produce politically committed criticism of what's going on in northwestern Bosnia, in the city of Bihać, which is where I was born. So just to kind of clarify certain things, I mean, and to invite discussion, what do I mean by periphery? Opting to use the term periphery in social sciences, and I'm sure many of the audience members know that, it's inevitably connected with dependency theories, which kind of subscribes to the ideas of uneven development, resulting in the existence of what Wallerstein calls core periphery and semi-periphery. And peripherality to these guys is a state with really measurable socioeconomic origins. They do measure peripherality. So, for instance, while Yugoslavia, socialist Yugoslavia, was classified as semi-periphery, we are now witnessing this sort of escalation of peripherality. And by many authors, post-Yugoslav Bosnia and Herzegovina, post-socialist Bosnia and Herzegovina, has been classified by Dunway and Cleland as periphery, super periphery, to quote from Bartlett, or even periphery of the periphery. And as opposed to Croatia and Serbia, for instance, still being classified as semi-peripheries. And the reason for this escalating peripherality is not just the terrible devastation suffered during the 90s wars, or 92-95 war, but also the exceptionally high unemployment rate, the low growth rates during its post-socialist phase, I've written about it elsewhere, marked by incompetent, corrupt governments, migrations, and the crisis spilling over from the EU. So that's one thing. The urge, why decolonial approach, and what do I mean by that? Again, a lot of controversy around decolonization and what decoloniality has meant. So first of all, I see Bosnia as the peripheral borderland, and border. It's not just it's a plateau, and it's both discursive and material. It comprises subjects of border regimes in which the borders outside has become synonymous with periphery. Studying Bosnia and Herzegovina as a borderland, as a peripheral borderland with nested peripheral selves, presents an opportunity for decolonial politics that unites the post-colonial, the post-socialist world, despite their uneasy solidarity. This solidarity is not always easily achievable. The quote from Metzadra and Nielsen, peripheral borderlands are mobile, multiple, and always shifting. They constantly multiply labor and produce new subjectivities, selves, in or fleeing war, poverty, injustice, and terror, becoming what Achille Mbembe calls the black of the world, in a process of universalized commodification of people. What do I mean by peripheral selves? So first of all, for post-socialist Bosnian and Herzegovinians, they have first and foremost been subjects to what Samir Amin calls global precaritization or global proletarianization, even though social movements in Bosnia and Herzegovina had different understandings of what this meant. As a country with half of its population now diasporic and a designated borderland for refugee reception camps since 2015, the new social movement in Bosnia and Herzegovina has been migrations. Bosnia has been site of recasting of European periphery and center precisely through precaritization as the new global proletarianization, securitization, and humanitarianism, a gendered and racial revalorizations of peripheral bodies, feeding to the capitalist expansions of those who have already left, those who are preparing to leave, or have been stranded on their route in Bosnia and Herzegovina. What Amin invites us to think further is how to think relinking and delinking, how it will take place, under what conditions, and whether it will happen at all. But that debate remains a topic for debate of some future research. Also, affect. I wanted to say a couple of things about affect, just so we are on the same page, and why it was so crucial for me as somebody who's trained as a critical discourse analyst to kind of resort to this cosmology or new epistemology of affect. This is what also some Marxist scholars from Argentina have been writing about, Castagne and so on, about this politics of emotions. I think affects precede emotions. And affect and new materialism, for me, helped me depart in a way from what is traditionally called in CDA triangulation. Of course, deep contextualizations are crucial for any substantial, any solid cultural studies work. We need history, we need anthropology, we need theory, philosophy, political science, all of that stuff. But Laura Richardson talks about something else. She talks about crystallization, in which she says the crystal combines symmetry and substance and an infinite varieties of shapes, substances, transmutations, multidimensionalities, and angles of approach. Crystals grow, change, alters. What we see depends on upon our angle of repose, not triangulation, crystallization. Crystallization provides us with deepened, complex, thoroughly partial understandings of the topics. So to kind of continue in this vein, I wanted to mention just a second. Here is something that that I wanted to kind of mention what for me meant really this crystallization. It was a specific and very deliberate choice to use to resort to Donna Haraway and Adrienne Rich. And if you give me a second, I'll also read a little bit about that. Just a second. Okay, just a second. So just a second. Something's blocking me here. So Haraway talks a lot about situated knowledge, limited location situated knowledge as a path to feminist objectivity, seeking to establish an earthwide network of connections, including the ability to partially translate knowledges among very different and power differentiated communities, to build meanings and bodies that have a chance for life. Writing about this situated knowledge, I found two other theorists very important for my coming of age and ability to write this book, while also working with my research participants and acknowledging this specific researched assemblage, whereby I was unable to objectively detach myself from this lived experience. It was primarily the work of Adrienne Rich, you know, her work on political location, politics of location, and Glissant's poetics of relation. So that for me was very important to kind of take that the feminist objectivity, which is never you know, the typical objectivity that we think, but it was this feminist optic in a body-centered and eclectic epistemological approach, which inevitably focused on personal politics and social change, trying to locate foundations of truths, not one truth but several, to be explored in specific historical, economic, racialized, gendered, and social infrastructures of oppression, injustice, and peripheralization. I also wanted to mention decoloniality just a little bit. How are we on time, Alexandra? We still have time, yeah?
You have 10, 15 minutes
10,
more.
15 minutes, good. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, you know, I've had a lot of struggles with the decolonial option, which, according to Mignolo, is an active, conscious, ethical, political, and epistemic position. I just somehow thought, and of course, a cry against slavery. But according to Tuck and Yang, decolonization is not a metaphor, and we should not translate or adopt Western or even, you know, global East or global Southern concepts as we see fit. So I'm sure that such eclecticism can also be, sometimes it's a poison, sometimes it's a remedy. But I really wanted to make sure that, to me, how I understood decoloniality, that was never, that was always critical. And in this sense, of course, despite what Manuela Boatka sometimes calls, like from the 16th century, Eastern Europe, many regions of the Eastern Europe have been experienced. They focused what's been proto-colonial situation to neo-colonial situation at best, despite the absence of formal colonization. I resorted to critical education scholars Tuck and Yang, who warn even more explicitly against the metaphorical use of decolonization, because I quote them, when metaphor invades decolonization, it kills the very possibility of decolonization, despite the discourses and frameworks preceding it being critical, even if they're anti-racist, even if they're justice frameworks. When we write about decolonization, we're not offering it as a metaphor. It's not an approximation of other experiences of oppression, and it does not have a synonym. The work, in other words, the work, and I cannot never mention this enough, the work of decolonization is deeply unsettling. And I propose that struggles against colonization in B&H should not in any way be positioned as equal to other struggles in more traditional colonial contexts, including Africa, Asia, Latin America. Instead, they should be read within this optic because they share the traits of peripherality and they mobilize the colonial wound. And lastly, in terms of theory, I wanted to say a few words on how I quote from Wilder, I use this notion of freedom time because I wanted to see how, despite many decolonial scholars' rejection of socialism, equalizing, like Plostano, for instance, who argues the decolonial option has nothing to do with socialism and socialist modernity, which he equates with coloniality. And I quote, in both Western liberal and socialist versions of modernity, coloniality are vectorial time and progressivist teleology, the absurdly rationalized management of knowledge and subjectivity, the sanctification of technological development, the cult of the future, and the dismissal of negatively marked tradition. Here, I had to resort to some more recent work that happened within this loosely called post-Yugoslav scholarship, the work of Okic and Duganjic about the Women's Anti-Fascist Front, the work of Paul Stubbs on the non-aligned movement, and the work of Gal Kirn on the partisan counter-archive. And I read in my theoretical intro, People's Liberation Army for National Liberation from Nazi Germany, domestic traitors during World War II. I call it a prime. This is something that Branimir Stojanovic also points out. He calls it a prime example of anti-colonial struggle. Also, the outcomes of the Women's Anti-Fascist Front in terms of the emancipation of women and unprecedented increase in literacy cannot be that easily dismantled. In fact, Yugoslav socialism, with all its controversies, brought a reconstitution of anti-capitalist relations, at least at the beginning, by introducing the concept of socially owned property coupled with the ideology of brotherhood and unity. It experimented, according to Samari and Leplat, with radically egalitarian relations of self-management, and of course played a key role in the establishment of NAM. These are all important artifacts, and when discussing decoloniality and decolonization and socialism, I'm sure this is just there's a lot more work to be done to see how these things are interconnected when it comes to former socialist countries, peripheries, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, Samir Amin is definitely someone we should read in this respect. So I can talk about the theoretical part later, maybe just a couple words about my my eclecticism of critical autoethnography in terms of Basok, of what Basok has meant. Chapter 4 is an homage to this whole era in which with Leila Shepherd, with Dražen Crnomat, with Zoran Vučkovac, and many others, we tried to build something, to build new solidarities with people from the former Yugoslav region, assembled around the politics of memory, feminism, social justice. We discussed many things. So Basok was, and still is, although in a different way, was a place where many of the post-Yugoslav left feminists met and really we all learned from each other. Then I also wanted to read from Jelena Marjanovic, who's in terms of like the Justice for David. I mean, something that was really truly shocking for me when she actually, I remember it, don't have to read it. When she said to me, when she was trying to, she's also one of the activists who I interviewed, and I interviewed 6 most prominent activists for the book. When she said that when they were asking foreign embassies for help and support, that basically they were working. I met her in Vienna. I was in Vienna as part of my Humboldt that was unfortunately interrupted by the pandemic. And I was conducting my interviews in Vienna in early March of 2020, when Jelena said, they want us to provide them with 18 cases of unresolved murders, and only then will they react. And I thought that was just like the whole bestiality of the international community to kind of ask for such a thing. They needed a number of 18. And I also wanted to read, this is just to kind of throw the bait to all of you who are here tonight, but kind of to provoke you at the same time. I wanted to read from the book a short excerpt by one of my interlocutors, Jelena, that's her fake name, of course, who in the summer of 2018, she learned she was pregnant. Her then boyfriend had already gotten a job in a Pflegeheim in Hessen. And in 2019, she gave birth to a baby girl in Germany. He was born in Germany. And this meant several things for her. She was unemployed at the time. But for her, this meant entitlement to the so-called Elterngeld, parent allowance, and Kindergeld, child allowance from the province of Hessen. And her husband immediately moved to a different tax bracket, all of which meant a substantial increase of their household income. And I quote what Jelena said to me at that time, when I asked her, well, how do you see life in Bosnia and life here in Germany now that you have moved? She says, you can advance here, especially if you learn the language well. In Bosnia, the pinnacle of human ambition is to get a government job and work from 8 to 4, but very few can get this. Here, if you have integrated, learn the language and hold a job, they don't have a problem with you. We are not a burden on the German state. I went to school in Bosnia. Somebody paid for it, and Germany took the product of that education. It would be best for Bosnia to sell its workforce. If Norway had been paid for every person who came, Bosnia would now be a rich country. So again, to kind of learn more about who I met on this very, very life-changing journey for me, you definitely have to read the book, and I hope that you will. And then in the end, I kind of, as I said, wanted to think from a proxy about a certain problem, a certain issue. I told you at the beginning the problems that I had with this whole predatory kind of vulturesque exploitation. I think we always, when doing social research, okay, when you're studying literature, it's a different thing. And when you're studying, although that can be a slippery slope, but when you're researching, when you're dealing with real people, when you're talking with real people, there's this issue of transfer. There's always, this relationship is always problematic, and there's no clear-cut way out of this conundrum. Simply, there simply isn't. We can talk about, academic honesty and stuff like that. But I think what really we should strive to have, and this is something that I've been trying to cultivate within myself, is some sort of epistemic humility. Because these answers, the people that we're going to meet on this journey, this is my advice to young students, MA students, PhD, BA students, to kind of cultivate this epistemic humility. Really read read and always work on yourself. Try to, don't run away from challenges. There's going to be many, many challenges. But, this epistemic humility in today's world is, I think, one of the ways in which migrants, however we call, and I think, that we can really demigrantize the migrant, especially if we are talking about migrants who come from, let's say, greater periphery, but still to a periphery, like Bosnia and Herzegovina, that it equipped us, this troubled country really equipped us with a particular sensibility, or at least it did in my case, but this humility, epistemic humility, is definitely one way of going forward. And even if we make mistakes, it's never too late. It's always, we should go back, look back on stuff, try to ameliorate, to somehow correct if possible, and never shun to enter a dialogue and really hold your position and be in a way principled in hold up to your principles in what you do and to your political commitment. And I think this is like my sort of final message for all of you who came today, that yeah, these are some of my principles. I'm sure I've made a lot of mistakes, but these I mean, I have to own them, but I also think I did open some new avenues and provided some new sensibilities of how to discuss social movements, migrations, peripheralization, et cetera, et cetera. So without further ado, yeah, I will stop here. I hope I wasn't too long.
No.
And yeah, I'm really excited to hear about the questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Danijela, for this very comprehensive overview and presentation in just 35 minutes of a very, very rich book. So now I would like, as I said, to open up discussion, and please feel free to comment, to ask your questions, or just to reflect on the things we just heard. Yeah, this should be an open conversation, and yeah, please feel free to join. You can raise your question or give a comment by